In 1833, the scholar Thoreau was admitted to Harvard University as a student in the Faculty of Arts. He read a lot of books, but didn't want to follow the path already taken by others. Rather than planning out a rigid life path like most people, he preferred a more carefree lifestyle. He found it utterly boring to keep doing the same thing just to earn money. Thoreau wandered around, working various jobs while exploring the world. He worked as a gardener, surveyor, and even did hard labor. During his travels, whenever he had some thoughts, he would write them down and send them to magazines to earn a bit of money for living expenses. As he continued his journey, Thoreau noticed something peculiar. Many people seemed to be striving hard, trying to find freedom, but instead of looking within themselves, they sought it through external material possessions. They believed that having money and more material goods would bring them freedom. These people kept chasing and chasing, but even after gaining some wealth, they didn't feel free. They thought they needed more money to be free, and having enough material possessions wasn't enough. They believed they needed more and better things to be happy. They never found freedom or equality. All they saw was endless pursuit. Thoreau realized that true freedom and equality couldn't be found in material wealth. The truly free person isn't the one with the most possessions, but the one with the richest and most peaceful inner life. In today's terms, Thoreau was a top student who entered Harvard's Faculty of Arts at the age of 16 or 17. But he wasn't a conventional student. He hated rules and preferred a spontaneous life over a well-structured one. After graduating from college, the most successful thing Thoreau did was co-found a private school with his brother. His brother was the main force, while Thoreau provided support. However, when his brother fell ill, Thoreau's career in education came to an end. Thoreau nearly became a millionaire when he worked at a pencil manufacturing factory. He improved the manufacturing process and created a superior pencil with advanced technology. If he had applied for a patent and quickly started selling the pencils, he could have become wealthy. But Thoreau neither applied for a patent nor rushed to make money. Instead, he left the factory because he found the idea of repeatedly doing the same thing to make money utterly boring. Thoreau continued to travel and wander, working different jobs while seeing the world. He worked as a gardener, did surveying, and occasionally wrote articles. By modern standards, he would be seen as a failure, someone without long-term goals, just a drifter. Eventually, Thoreau borrowed a piece of land from his friend Emerson and took a borrowed axe, which its owner said was as precious as his own eyes and should not be damaged. Perhaps with a small amount of money in his pocket, Thoreau announced, "I am going to the forest because I want to live life truly, to live deeply and suck out all the marrow of life, to rid myself of all that is not life so that when I die, I won't discover that I hadn't lived at all." He walked into a pine forest, started chopping down trees, and as he lifted his head, he saw Walden Pond in the distance, with its beautiful scenery spread out before him. When he was tired, he would head home, listening to the larks singing along the way. After chopping down the trees, he began to plane the wood, one stroke at a time. Once the wood was planed, he started building a house, not a big or luxurious one, not particularly creative, just something to live in. By spring, the house had taken shape. After finishing all this, he heard that someone had some second-hand boards they didn't want, so he bought them for a low price and started to build his house. Thoreau was a laid-back person, neither rushing nor fearing delays. He did things at his own pace. Once the house was completed, Thoreau calculated his expenses and found that it had cost him only $28.15, equivalent to a college student's annual rent at the time. And so, he had his own house. On America's Independence Day, he moved into his small cabin and officially began his secluded life. It's easy to imagine that the cabin wasn't luxurious, but it was enough to shield him from the wind and rain. He only had 3 chairs, one for himself and 2 for guests. When more people came over, most had to stand. Thoreau said that the cost of buildings far exceeds their utility, driven by vanity. If we think a house is too shabby and feel embarrassed, then we're not living in a house, but in our pride. If we feel ashamed because our house isn't large, it's not the house that shames us, but our small-mindedness. Our minds are poor, so when the house isn't grand, we suffer. Once the house was built, the next question was how to live. Before the house was even finished, Thoreau had thought about this issue. He needed to find a way to earn $10 as a reserve fund for extra expenses. But Thoreau didn't want to go out and work. He wanted to earn money in a pleasant and honest way. What did he do? He started planting crops and vegetables near his house, mainly beans, along with potatoes, peas, corn, and radishes. Besides the crops, he also planted some pine trees and hickories. These were grown without fertilizer, he only occasionally weeded and plowed, and the roots he dug up were used for firewood. After selling these goods, Thoreau had his startup fund, and he also had food. After subtracting all expenses, he earned $8.72 in the first year. In the second year, he turned over all the land, yielding even better crops and more income. Thoreau also calculated how much he ate. In 8 months, he consumed $8.74 worth of food. He said, "From my 2 years of experience, I've learned that if a person lives frugally, only eating what they grow, and grows only what they eat, without trading grain for endless luxuries and expensive items, then they only need to cultivate a few square yards of land to survive." In Thoreau's view, cultivating such a small piece of land didn't even require an ox for plowing. All the necessary farming tasks could be done by oneself, and it wasn't difficult. Thoreau survived and lived quite comfortably, so he concluded, "From my 2 years of experience, I've learned that even in this climate, obtaining the necessary food for survival is not hard, it's remarkably easy. A person can live simply like an animal, but still maintain health and strength. People inevitably face this situation. Often they go hungry, not because they lack essentials, but because they don't have luxuries." Of course, Thoreau acknowledged that this was due to economic considerations rather than a pursuit of fine food. In reality, people often demand more than they truly need. The excess isn't driven by aesthetics, but by anxiety and vanity. Anxiety makes people want to grasp more, and vanity makes them find satisfaction in the material pyramid. The anxious constantly worry about the future, believing that by grasping more, they can cope with future uncertainties, but for most, there is no end. The vain don't need material itself, but the applause of others. Thoreau entered Walden Pond to conduct a life experiment. He wanted to see what real life required and how much was truly needed. Thoreau lived in the 19th century when the United States had become a powerful nation with rapid industrial development. However, the increasing abundance of material goods didn't make people happier. Instead, more and more people became obsessed with materialism, constantly pursuing it, but material wealth had no end. In mythology, Hercules was strong and fearless, ultimately completing 12 heroic labors. But Thoreau found that this was nothing compared to the hardships endured by the people around him. For even the most difficult of Hercules' labors had an end. There would eventually be a day of completion. But the people living around Thoreau were constantly busy, not even having time to eat properly, yet there was never any heroic achievement. Why was this? Because people's labor was governed by superficial fate, also known as necessity. People spent their lives toiling away, accumulating wealth, worrying about man-made problems out of ignorance and error. Out of fear of hardship, they worked endlessly but never lived well. They lived timidly, bowing and scraping, frightened every day, slaves and prisoners of their own beliefs. They worked themselves to death just to gain some kind of legitimacy. But it's precisely a person's view of themselves that determines their destiny. Put bluntly, what kind of life you want determines how you live. Some may say, I don't want to live like this, but reality doesn't allow it. Don't be ridiculous, reality hasn't bound your hands and feet. Apart from life's basic needs, everything extra is just our perception of life, our perception of ourselves, and our desires. What are life's basic needs? In the current climate, the essentials for life are food, shelter, clothing, and fuel. Each of these can be obtained in a simpler and more direct way. If there's food when you're hungry, clothes when you're cold, and a house to live in, then you can survive. But why do we make life so difficult? Because of our expectations for life. We don't just want to eat, we want delicious food. It seems that we're not just eating food, but also living a lifestyle, projecting an image. We don't just want to be warm, we want to look good. It's not just about looking good, it seems.